Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. To start with, sort of a contemporary question. What do you think about the ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court on the Boy Scouts and their leadership? Well, it's a good question. I favor both the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts being able to pick their members. Now, you think about it, if you are able to pick the membership, then you should be able to pick the leadership, and that just necessarily follows. I'm for the Rotary Club, the Lions Club, Catholic Daughters, Knights of Columbus, Baptist Young People, the Wesleyan groups. I'm for all of them being able to pick their membership. I think that freedom of association is important. And how do you have a group that's able to pick leadership without, a membership without picking leaders? If somebody wants to stand up publicly and say, I'm a fornicator, I'm an adulterer, I'm an unchaste whatever, a sinner, at the same time wants to be a leader of my children or my grandchildren or great-grandchildren, no, I don't think that's a kind of leadership the group needs. I think it's trying to make a political statement more than it is a leadership statement. You know, we didn't used to have questions like this come up in society. It was pretty simple. You remember the days even when school teachers were picked by school boards, and school boards were community representatives, and programs were always geared to fit the community norms. They had to be. Teachers weren't hired if they didn't fit the norms. Well, we got away from some of that. I don't know that there's an improvement, and it's getting worse because of this, because so many mothers are out of the home working, that more and more children are really spending time with other adults, and who these other adults are necessarily becomes more important. Well, here's another one. It says we've heard a lot about the Roe versus Wade in recent weeks. What is that? Roe versus Wade. It's another question about Supreme Court. Because in the recent elections, there were questions about who would be appointed to the Supreme Court and so on. Well, Roe versus Wade was a court ruling down in Dallas. You know, I met Wade. I was in a court one time where he was a prosecutor and I was a expert witness supposedly for the defense. He was district attorney in Dallas County. But that was a ruling, the Roe versus Wade ruling came about in which the justices came up with a rather strange thing. They said the unborn child is not a legal person. When you think about it, not a legal person. Didn't say it wasn't alive, didn't say it wasn't human, said it wasn't a legal person. Now, it's the same wording that the Dred Scott case had. Anybody who's a history buff may remember that Dred Scott and his family, I think it was 1857, were declared not legal persons because they were Negro or black or slaves. They were all. Now, once a court starts ruling that somebody's not a legal person because of some characteristic, you think what kind of a door that opens. If you're not a legal person because of age, like 20 weeks after conception, how about 85 years after birth? By the same logic, a court could rule that somebody who's 75 wouldn't be considered a legal person. Just as arbitrary. So it's a rather hazardous ruling, in my opinion. And even though Justice Brennan, I believe it was, who was the author of that particular one, got a lot of plaudits, a lot of credit in some circles for that. You think about it. You think about the Holocaust. We should have learned something somewhere along the way. Some people were basically not considered legal persons because of nationality, because they had dark hair, brown eyes, belonged to a certain religious group. Yeah, it's been done. Not a legal person. Well, here's another question. It says, my brother had a peculiar reaction to stress, and the doctor said he had a fugue state. What is a fugue state? Well, a fugue is a type of amnesia. A person may appear to be okay, but really is not aware of, at the time, of who he is or where he is. Fugue states are usually not long-lasting, but they come about sometimes because of stress or some other condition. I've seen people, I used to work with a guy, he was a psychologist who would have a fugue state. He'd go to the store, for example, at night, go get a loaf of bread or a bottle of milk for the kids. And then maybe call his wife the next morning from 1,000 miles away. Instead of going to the store, he'd go get on a plane, do something strange, and not really be aware of what he was doing at the time. And then when he would get over it, knew who he was, no after effects. Rather peculiar. Well, here's another one. It says, my son is 24 and seems to have a lot of trouble keeping a job or even staying in college long enough to finish. What can I do? Well, I start asking some questions. Is this a problem that started recently? Was it in high school? How about his high school? Who supports him? Talking about he has trouble keeping a job but can't go to college. He's 24. Somebody probably supporting him. Are you doing it? Are you a safety net? Do you allow him to do this sort of thing, to live off of you? And you ask about college, or said something about not being able to finish. Well, why is he going to college? Why would anybody want to go to college? Does he have a plan? Does he have a reason? Not everybody should go to college. And some people go just to fill in time. I remember one time at Plattsburgh State, I did a little survey back about 69, 70, among students, and asked them why they were in college, and I was very surprised because at the time female students outnumbered the males quite a bit. It's that way again, by the way, in the colleges nationally, but at that time it was usually the other way around. And so many of the girls said they were in college to find a mate, somebody to marry, find a husband. But anyway, back to this question about the 24-year-old. I would suggest setting some rules. Set some rules for yourself first so you know you'll keep them. Tell him very clearly what you expect. Do you expect him to have a job by a certain time? Do you expect him to finish school by a certain time? But I wouldn't insist about him going to school unless he has a reason. Too many people go to school without a reason. Tell him when you want him to be self-supporting, and you quit supporting him. And that's going to be the hard part. Sometimes it's called tough love. Well, here's a question. Sort of a strange one in a way. I share it because it came up. It says, I have a 14-year-old son who was caught trying to have sex with a 10-year-old cousin. And the mother said, I'm frantic. But she had the problem, said the father just laughed about it. So she was concerned about what she could do. That does make a problem, doesn't it? First, I would suggest don't make a federal case out of it. Literally. Obviously, that shouldn't be going on. But the bigger you blow up the situation, the worse it'll be. So, let's say this 14-year-old. He said caught trying to have sex. That says a whole lot and says nothing in a way, but we don't really know. I don't know what that really means. Let's look at it another way. I would suggest getting some other man to talk to him. Do you have a minister, priest, rabbi, school counselor? You got somebody to talk to the lad and see what's really on his mind. Now the girl, I would hope her mother could talk to her and help her get straightened out a little bit. And that doesn't mean she's done anything wrong, not at all. But to get over this sort of thing, and the quicker she gets over it, the better. Sometimes these things are blown way out of proportion. Here's another question. Says, I'm recently widowed. My spouse died 13 months ago, and I'm getting lonely. Where can I socialize without making the bar scene? Not an uncommon problem, not just for widows or widowers, but I hear that from time to time from young adults. They say, I don't want to go to bars, I don't like bar scenes, but where can I socialize? Well, the most common place, go to church. And while in church, afterwards and before church, look around and talk to people. Let it be known that you'd like to socialize. Usually there's somebody who's a matchmaker who wants to get people together. And sometimes you'll have to run from them once they get started. I talked to somebody the other day who basically had the same problem, and all of a sudden people were just coming out of the woodwork because of one particular person is trying to go around and say so-and-so and so-and-so is available and it's a good choice and be a good person. And other people are getting interested. The person didn't have any idea that there were so many single people around. But there are special interest groups too. What do you like to do? You like to play chess, you like to ski, whatever kind of skiing or sports, stamp collection, the railroads, the arts, the music, the painting. There are all kinds of special interest groups where people go to socialize as well, not just the particular trait or characteristic. Best thing to do is not feel sorry for yourself, but to think about what you're interested in and then go follow that interest. You have peace within yourself, and you'll be then attractive and like to be with other people. Here's a question. It says, I read about a horrible crime, then I heard about it on television. How can you tell if somebody is really insane? Well, I follow the old MacNaughton rule. Daniel MacNaughton was somebody way back. There was a case in England, but the case established some pretty good rules. I think they're good in trying to determine who is insane and who isn't. Because at that time, that court ruled that a person is insane if he has a condition when present, that condition renders the person unable to know right from wrong, or to enter into his own defense, and to know the consequences of his acts. Three basic conditions that I've found over the years, and I used to work in mental hospitals with maximum security for the criminally insane. That was always part of where I worked when I was working in mental hospitals. I found that very easy to follow. And at the time I was a psychologist. I was supposed to be able to do all kinds of things to find out a person's sanity, give them all kinds of psychological tests. And sometimes it was very difficult. But even though I might have given a lot of tests, I usually came down to the question, did the person know right from wrong, the consequences of the act, and can the person enter into his own defense? And that served me very well. You know, when I worked for Texas Department of Mental Health, there were times, not many, but times when people on death row, I heard a lot about that lately, but who would become mentally ill while waiting for the execution on death row. Of course, it's standard law that you can't execute somebody who is not mentally competent, because it would interfere with their own defense if something came up. And as long as a person was not mentally competent to defend himself or to know the consequences, that wouldn't make any sense, whether or not you're in favor of capital punishment. But it was a strange kind of thing. To work with somebody who was mentally ill, if you helped them get better, they went back to death row and were executed. If they didn't, they stayed alive. It sort of brought you to focus on a lot of different things. But back to the insanity question. Insanity question in law, it's not a medical term, not a psychiatric term. A person can be insane at the time of the alleged offense, insane at the time of trial. I say alleged because if the person is considered to have been insane at the time of the alleged offense, they're not tried for the offense. A person could be insane at the time of the offense and insane at the time of trial. A person wouldn't be tried, be acquitted by reason of insanity. A person could have it the other way around. Could have been sane at the time of the alleged crime and insane at the time of the trial. So what would happen would they would be committed to an institution until they regain their sanity. And it gets rather complicated. And it gets complicated when you put in such things as irresistible impulses, moral insanity. I've heard all sorts of things like that. So it's very fuzzy when you really get in my opinion, away from the old MacNaughton rule. Well, so much for that one. I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. I have an interesting question, I think, to start off here. So do you think girls should compete with boys in really tough contact sports like boxing, wrestling, and football? No, I don't. I really don't. I don't think it's fair for either boys or girls in those really rough sports. I've boxed and wrestled a little bit in the Navy, and was a bouncer for a little while in college, in my undergraduate days. And I really can't imagine a man who thinks of himself as a man really wanting to beat up on a woman. That just doesn't fit. Now, you get into really competitive boxing. I'm not talking about just boxing as an exercise. I like to do that. But you take boxing in a ring where it's really competitive. What's your goal? Your goal is to hurt somebody. Your goal is to knock somebody out, or to bruise them to the extent, or make them so tired they can't keep fighting. That's the goal in boxing. Basically, it's to hurt somebody. That's what a knockout is. TKO, all that sort of thing. I can't imagine a man wanting to do that to a woman. Nor can I imagine a woman wanting to get in a ring and being taken. All these fancy television shows we see today, where these little women, you see them, the 100-pounders taking on 250-pound guys. Hey, that's just in the movies. I've never seen that work. Oh, occasionally I've seen little people get the best of big people. But one-on-one, both of them skilled fighters. You better not put that kind of competition on. Expect anybody not to get hurt. You ever notice that these women are always kicking these men in the crotch, but the men never kick the woman in the crotch? For some reason, that's sort of strange. Left out. You take wrestling. Wrestling is not quite as combative as boxing, but I don't think that ought to be. Not in mixed sports. In football, take football right now. You get out on a mud field, or maybe it's frozen and maybe it's whatever, and you're supposed to grind down the opponent. Grind them down so the opponent can't play effectively. It's not quite as clean in a sense of just getting down in the mud and grinding. As soccer people get plenty muddy and cold and everything else, but usually once they're on the ground, I think that's when they stop kicking. But look at people who are really into these contact sports. I don't think so. And I'm well aware that there are federal laws that say, well, men and women should be able to compete in athletic events on equal par, but like talked about one time about insanity. I would consider it close to insanity if some woman were to get out and really get into a professional boxing match. I saw one time on television where a woman actually beat a guy. But I think that's an exception. I think it'd be insane. Well, here's another question. It said, my son doesn't want to go to college, but everybody else in the family has a college degree. He's a high school senior. What can I do? Well, not long ago we had a question like that about somebody, I believe, who was 24, but this one, maybe you don't need to do anything. He's a high school senior. What does he want to do? Since everybody else has a college degree, I presume everybody else is happy that they have one, that it paid off well for them, but suppose it didn't. There are a lot of people who have college degrees and they don't use it. It was just something to do. Why not sit down with this lad, or don't have to sit down, you go walking. That's a favorite expression, to sit down and talk, but that's sometimes not the best way of talking to people. Take a hike, go hunting, do something. But what's his goal? What does he want? Sometimes I think it's very logical that somebody doesn't want to go to college. I remember a man, he's rather successful locally. And he told me how carefully he avoided college to do exactly what he wants to do. And he's doing it. And he's making a great deal more money than a lot of college graduates I know. But he did exactly what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it, in terms of his work. Maybe your son has a hidden ambition. Maybe he's afraid to say what he really wants to do because everybody in apparently the family already has opinions. I've been to 9 colleges, universities. But I didn't want to go to college. No, I wanted to be a career Navy. And it was interesting. That's a long story how I got from one place to the other one. I remember one time in graduate school, my highest paying job at the time, I'd never had a job that paid $10 an hour. I just thought that was out of sight. I was trying to earn a little money, keep myself in school, and I worked in a wholesale automobile auction, Southwest Automobile Auction, and wow, these guys would come there and buy cars. Some of them would buy as many as 100 cars at a time. They were really into the big time. My job was to keep track of the bids, the auctioneer, and to go to the person who made the last bid and get the signature on a contract. So I was jumping all over the place, and that's why they paid so much at the time. Do you know what happened? It wasn't uncommon for me to witness the signature of somebody who couldn't write his name. Pull out a roll of $100 bills to pay for the cars, didn't use checks. I kept thinking there's something wrong with the picture. I'm working to stay in school, and I already have a college degree, one of them. And these guys can't read and write, some of them, but I'm working for them. Interesting about college sometimes, isn't it? But have a reason to go to school. I think you'll find, make school a much better place. Here's a question. It says, my father-in-law and I have a running battle about religion in our family. He says people don't have to go to church to be religious. And I say to be religious means you also have to go to church. My mother-in-law agrees with me. My wife agrees with her father. What's the best thing to do for the family? Wow. What are the children supposed to believe right now? You have a very interesting split there. I think most important, first thing to do is you and your wife agree on what kind of model you're going to make. How are you going to handle this? What do you want your children to believe in? Now, there's an old question. It goes way back in psychology. Are you running because you're afraid, or are you afraid because you're running? Well, the same kind of question applies to religion. I've heard it. Are you in church because you're religious, or are you religious because you're in church? I think they go hand in hand. But I think I would come down on the side that says children need structured religion. Many parents today, thinking they're doing the right thing, say, well, I'm not going to choose for my child or our children. We are going to let them decide for themselves. And what that usually means is the parents have already decided they have no religion. And that's basically what the children do. Sociologically, most children are found to benefit, most families found to benefit from religion, the practice of it. Social studies, studies of families. Some people say, well, I'll leave the choice to my child and give them comparative religion. I don't think comparative religions ought to be studied until the child is at least 15 years of age. And here's the reason. I don't think anybody can really make a comparison of religion without knowing something about one religion, whatever that may be. To know one religion clearly, then one can make comparisons. But if you get somebody who has not been reared, trained, or brought up in a particular religion, and you start throwing out a bunch of comparisons, I think it's more confusing than anything else. And most children can't really benefit from that I've seen. I've seen some religious education programs try that with young kids, and in my opinion, it doesn't really work. See, that's without negating any particular religion. I'm not talking against or for any particular religion. I'm talking there in reference to what I think people need best. And children, I think, need a formal instruction. They're going to be learning, and you can't keep them from learning. So if you and your wife are setting a model, expect the children to follow it. And here's what you'll also find. Children will model and follow the parents, whether or not the parents want them to. And in reference to religion, I seem to have observed, and I'm concluding after quite a few years, that if the parents are happy in their religion, the children will follow that religion gladly, but too often the parents mandate a particular form or structure of religion, but the parents don't seem happy in it themselves. And if that's the case, then don't expect the children to follow it. I know numerous families where that seems to be. The parents are doing what they think they're supposed to be doing to benefit their children, but it's a real problem. How do they know what's going to be best for the children? And so they're a little afraid of it. You know, being a parent has some awesome responsibilities. And one of them, though, is to train your children, to bring them up. And most all of the major religions say bring them up in the faith. And since you know your own religion best, that's probably the best for the children as well. I think it's very important to keep that in mind. Here's another question. So should children have equal rights within the law? Excuse me. Most people don't really clamor for equal rights for children. It has a good ring to it, but that's not really what most people are talking about. Can you imagine equal rights for children? The right of to go to school or not, the right to drink, imbibe in alcoholic beverages, to drive a car, to leave home. Of course, we know they leave home now at 16. To establish separate residences, though, to go in the military or not. You know, a lot of kids like to play soldier, and cops and robbers and all kinds of things. They have a right to play, but I don't think they have a right to make choices like that. I think children's rights should be the right to have an intact family, to be reared at home, to be treated like children. You know, some children are not treated like children. They're treated like little adults who are supposed to somehow know all kinds of things. I see too many children who are really put in the role of managing families. They're trying to keep these things together, trying to put things together, because the family's having problems or it's broken up and it gets worse and worse. And it's worse because there's so many divorces, so many people who don't marry, so many people who aren't married who insist on having children. Step-parent, step-family situations. Now, I'm not sure what you call it. There ought to be another name. When the parents don't divorce, but they take up with new partners. They're married to somebody else, living with somebody else, and the children are somewhere in there. I don't think that's healthy at all for children. And people talking about children's equal rights, I'm not quite sure what rights parents have to impose that kind of life on a child. It's wrong. Categorically wrong. You know, oftentimes in counseling we're supposed to take positions where we have no opinion. That we're supposed to allow the client to choose for himself or herself. I think that's a little artificial sometimes. If I see somebody going down the road and I know that there's an accident about to happen, I think it's my responsibility to tell them, yes, you have this right to do this sort of thing, but it's going to lead to this or to that, some calamity. And I know that some professional groups frown on that sort of thing. I'm talking about frown on what I might do. But my conscience is better if I've tried to help somebody avoid serious problems, and I think I'm doing my job. Instead of just standing off and watching them have a wreck, so to speak. Until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton, Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one. You're very kind. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. We'll start with sort of a heavy-duty question. I say heavy-duty because there's a lot of controversy. The question came up, is no-fault divorce working? No-fault divorce. Can you imagine what that really means? Maybe I think of it as heavy-duty because I did a lot of research on marriage, families, marriage vows, how people get married. I did a lot of research on it in several states. So I have big opinions. And one of the things I was researching was whether or not people thought that divorce laws should be made easier to get divorced or harder to get divorced. And you know, at the time, including surveys in New York State, most people thought divorce laws should be changed to make it harder to get a divorce. Let's think about what a no-fault divorce really is. People can get a divorce for any reason or no reason. They simply decide, one of them can decide to break the contract. Now, what kind of contract is that? You know, most people still get married in a church. And to get married in the church, they have made arrangements for the minister. It can be a priest, a rabbi, pastor of a church, any ordained minister, a deacon in some churches, can officiate at a wedding. Well, these people are designated to be official witnesses. Now, people usually set the time in advance. In other words, they send out invitations. They say, so-and-so, and proud to announce the marriage of. They have a public gathering. They go to the church after getting a license from the state that simply says within a certain period of time you're entitled to a contract for marriage. Contract. And then they go to that particular place and in front of an official witness they take vows. Most in the church they usually take some kind of religious vows. At least part of their oath says something like, so help me God, like promise to love, to honor, to cherish, to forsake all others, in sickness and in health, for rich or for poor, until death do us part, so help me God. Something like that. Some of you remember those marriage vows. This is all recorded. It's recognized by the state, whatever state it's in. But now, no-fault divorce. Here's a contract that's being treated as if it's not a contract at all. One of the most serious things anybody can do is to marry. And yet a no-fault divorce, in effect, says the contract is not a contract. You know, an ordinary business contract, people have to have a meeting of the minds. I believe in business law that's a requirement. Meeting of the minds. There has to be an exchange. In other words, someone does something in exchange for a performance. And there has to be an ability to perform, to carry out the contract. Now that's the very basic of a contract. That also applies to marriage. If there's not a meeting of the minds, if people are not intending to marry, there is a form in law which is called simulation, in canon law, where people just go through the ritual, but they never intend to marry. If there is not an exchange, there's no contract. And if the people do not have the capacity to carry out the contract to act married, to be married, there is no marriage. See, under any one of those three conditions, not being present, the marriage could be annulled, both in civil law and in canon law. So along comes this strange kind of thing called no fault. Now, no fault was intended to try to make life easier for people in the family. I remember when there was a lot of hullabaloo about it, and it was mainly legislative bodies that were working to change the law, but not necessarily what people wanted. The attorneys were wanting it. So people change their lives, they get married, they set out on a course of action that they've agreed to do, and then one of them suddenly says, I don't want to be married anymore. What does it do to the other one? Who may have given up a career or college or who knows what in order to be married and to act married, and then the no fault comes along and says, no reason. When I first moved to New York State, there was what was called a reconciliation statute, which I favored. In other words, before a person could obtain a divorce, the court had to have the evidence that the people had made an effort to try to reconcile. And, of course, that was abused, like most any kind of law, but it was a good idea. At the time, also, the only reason that people could get a divorce in New York State was for adultery. Of course, that was played to the hilt and made mockery of. So there were people who were hired to jump in bed, and a photographer take a picture, and that person would jump out of bed. There wasn't necessarily any sex. It was a staged thing. So they could prove to the court that there had been an adulterous affair. No fault divorce, in part, was to correct things like that. But I think in terms of what it's done to society, it's been a major problem. It teaches children that you don't necessarily have to keep your vows. Oaths, even though sacred oaths, you have to keep a contract in business to deliver something or to do something. But when it comes to something as trivial as marriage and family, you don't have to do that at all. I have a real problem with no-fault divorce. I'm well aware that it's very simple and very easy sometimes, but I think it's a major problem, and I think people really ought to think about it clearly. To counteract this, some states have taken up another provision to get married. They have a civil marriage, and then they have a separate agreement, which basically says they really do agree to stay married, and it's reminiscent. It's like what marriage was before no fault. And I think that's important. Well, leave that one for the moment. Go to the next one. The next one says, my sister has 3 children under the age of 6, and they spend a lot of time in front of the television. Is that okay? Well, obviously the person doesn't think so. I wouldn't ask the question. No, it's not okay. Too many people today are using television as babysitter. I see people park their children in front of television sets and expect them not to really learn anything, but to be entertained, somehow to see all the moving images and screens and so on. But you know what? Children cannot help learning. Children learn. I remember in the 70s, I also did a lot of research about soap operas. At the time, most people in New York State, a very wide sample of people, didn't think soap operas presented values for the family. I presume the same thing would be true today. I think soap operas have gotten even worse than they were then. But the same people who didn't think that soap operas represented family values or what they really wanted their children to learn might put a preschool child in front of the television set. These people would watch the soap operas themselves and think, oh, the child doesn't understand what's going on anyway. You know, children, and I think most of us can remember being a child. Children don't have to understand something to model it. What they see, they want to model. That's how children survive. They see people around them living and doing certain things, and that's a natural training ground for the child to learn to do whatever is being seen. So it may be several years later before a child really understands what was observed. So when you think about putting children in front of a television set, or you're going to use a television set as a babysitter, just know that whatever is there is going to influence the child. I've thought a lot about some of these horrendous crimes that young people have been doing lately, thinking, well, maybe they learned that from television, because even in the cartoons, and particularly in the cartoons, people are smashed and obliterated all the time. So what does that teach children? It may be death doesn't occur. Sometimes people in cartoons get up like Beetle Bailey. Gets all smashed and gets up and goes back to work. Sometimes some of these murders, these horrendous acts, seem to take on characteristics like that. I think it's a little three-letter word that sometimes ought to come into play with television. And it's OFF. Turn it off and visit with your child. Turn it off and play a game. Here are 3 children under 6. The question was about, would it be nice if these kids could just play? Children will play if you can give them an opportunity. And they don't have to have fancy toys. Sometimes they'd rather play with a box than the toy that came in it, because they can use their imagination. I've heard it discussed among educators about the toys today. Some of them don't leave anything left for a child to imagine. They're so sophisticated that children can't practice creativity. Well, I had a friend one time who was very concerned because he'd gone to a great deal of trouble to get his son just the right present, and he was baffled, because I remember it. He couldn't understand why his son would play with the box and leave the toys in the corner. Well, the youngster had an imagination, and he was doing all kinds of things more exciting with the box in his mind. So be it. Here's another question. It says, my husband is totally taken up with avoiding germs. Can he be helped? You know, not too long ago, that was a very difficult thing to try to help people with. Germ phobias usually went along with other kind of phobias. Germ phobias usually went along with obsessions. People who were obsessive compulsive. We've all seen people like that. And it was very resistive. Different kind of medication, different kind of treatments. 40 or 50 years ago, it was almost impossible to try to get somebody to improve. We didn't know what sometimes people did. Some of them got better, and we didn't know why. Maybe some of them got better in spite of us, not because of us. Today, though, it's a whole lot different. Somebody who's really totally taken up with germs, get therapy for them. And you may be quite surprised. There are two kinds of therapies that can eliminate a problem like that, or make it much more comfortable to live with. And it's well worth trying. Because these people usually are pretty miserable. Until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one.